Mark, a single dad and decorated veteran, straightened his tie for the 10th time. His reflection in the coffee shop window showed a man who looked more nervous than he ever did in the service. Tonight was his first blind date in years, a setup by his well-meaning sister. He'd almost cancelled, thinking about his son, Leo, who was spending the night with his grandparents. Was it selfish to be here? To want something for himself? He checked his watch. 7:15 p.m. She was 15 minutes late. He ordered a black coffee, the bitter taste a familiar comfort. As minutes ticked by, the knot in his stomach tightened. 7:30 p.m. People came and went. Their happy chatter, a stark contrast to the silence at his table for two. A familiar feeling of disappointment washed over him. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe he was meant to just be a dad. And that was enough. He dedicated his life to service, first for his country, now for his son. Perhaps that was his sole purpose. He took a final sip of his coffee, the cup now cold. 7:45 p.m. It was clear she wasn't coming. He sighed, pulling out his wallet to pay. Just as he stood up, a small voice piped up beside him. "Excuse me, are you Mark?" Mark looked down to see a little girl, with bright, curious eyes and pigtails, holding a teddy bear. Behind her stood 3 more children, 2 boys who looked like twins, and an older girl who held the youngest girl's hand protectively. They all stared at him with an oddly familiar mix of hope and apology. Mark knelt to their level, a smile touching his lips, despite his confusion. "I am. And who might you be?" The oldest girl, who looked about 12, stepped forward. "I'm Lily. These are my brothers, Sam and Tom, and this is Rosie." She gestured to each of them. Then she took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for a big announcement. "We're here to tell you that our mommy's sorry she's late." Mark blinked, completely taken aback. His date had children, 4 of them. His sister had conveniently left that part out. Before he could process this, the little girl named Rosie held up her teddy bear. "Mommy said you were a hero, like Captain America. Is that true?" The 2 boys, Sam and Tom, chimed in together. "Did you really fly in helicopters?" Mark found himself laughing, the earlier disappointment melting away. He looked at these 4 earnest faces and felt a connection he couldn't explain. "Well, I was in the army, and yes, I've been in a few helicopters." Just then, a flustered woman rushed through the door, her cheeks flushed, and her hair slightly windswept. Her eyes, the same bright, kind eyes as Lily's, scanned the room frantically until they landed on the small crowd gathered around Mark's table. "Oh, thank goodness! I am so sorry," she said, rushing over. "The babysitter cancelled at the last minute. And then the traffic was a nightmare, and I told them to wait in the car, but they never listen." She trailed off, taking a deep breath and extending a hand. "Hi, I'm Sarah, and it seems you've already met my welcoming committee." Mark stood up and shook her hand. It was warm and firm. He looked from her apologetic smile to the hopeful faces of her children. "It's a pleasure to meet all of you," he said, his voice sincere. "They were just telling me their mommy was running a little late." Sarah's shoulders slumped in relief. "You're not running for the hills?" Mark chuckled. "After raising a son on my own, it takes a lot more than 4 incredible kids to scare me. In fact," he said, gesturing to the empty chair, "they've done a great job of keeping your seat warm." Sarah's eyes welled up slightly. She looked at her children, who were now beaming, and then back at Mark. They were so excited. "I told them you were a veteran, and they think you're a superhero." "Well," Mark said, winking at the kids, "I'm not so sure about that, but I do know how to handle a mission, and I think this one," he glanced at Sarah, "is just getting started." They decided to forgo the quiet coffee shop Instead, Mark found himself at a nearby pizza place, sitting in a booth surrounded by cheerful chaos. He learned that Lily was an aspiring artist. Sam and Tom were inseparable soccer fanatics, and Rosie had an impressive knowledge of dinosaur names. He saw how Sarah managed them all with a beautiful blend of patience and humor, her love for them evident in every glance. He also talked about Leo. Pulling out a picture from his wallet, he showed them his son's latest school project, a lopsided model of the solar system. Sarah listened intently, asking about Leo's personality, his favorite things, what it was like being a single dad. For the first time, Mark wasn't just Mark the veteran or Mark the dad. With Sarah, he was just Mark. As they left the restaurant, little Rosie, who had been shy all evening, suddenly ran up and hugged his leg. "You're nice," she mumbled into his pants. "I hope you come over for dinner." Mark looked up at Sarah, whose face was glowing under the streetlights. "I'd like that very much," he said, his gaze fixed on hers. Over the next few weeks, dates weren't just for two. They were trips to the park with 5 kids in tow. They were movie nights on the couch, piled under blankets, with Leo, Lily, Sam, Tom, and Rosie. Mark watched Leo, who was often quiet and reserved, come out of his shell, laughing and playing with his new friends. He saw a joy in his son that he hadn't seen in a long time. One afternoon, while they were all at the park, Mark watched Sarah push Leo on the swings, her laughter echoing with his son's. The other kids were running around, a whirlwind of energy and happiness. It didn't feel like 2 separate families. It felt like one. He walked over and stood beside her. "You know," he started, his voice a little thick with emotion. "That first night, I was about to leave. I thought I'd been stood up." Sarah stopped pushing the swing and looked at him, her expression soft. "And I almost didn't come in. I was so embarrassed, thinking I'd already ruined my one chance." "I'm glad you did," Mark said, reaching out to take her hand. "You and your welcoming committee. You didn't just show up for a date." He squeezed her hand gently. "You showed up and changed my whole life." Sarah's smile was the brightest he'd ever seen. She looked at their chaotic, beautiful, blended family, and then back at him. "It looks like you changed ours too, Captain America." From that day on, Mark knew he had found a new mission. It wasn't about serving a country anymore. It was about serving this new, wonderful family he had found when he least expected it. He wasn't just a single dad anymore. He was part of a team, and together, they were building a new life. One filled with laughter, pizza nights, and an incredible amount of love. The blind date that started empty had led him to a life that was fuller than he could have ever imagined. Thanks so much for watching our story today. If you were touched by Mark and Sarah's journey, please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. We love sharing stories that warm the heart, and your support helps us bring more of them to you. We'll see you in the next video.